Thank you. So this is part of the community education series. We're endeavoring to continue to put these classes out on a pretty regular basis, monthly, sometimes maybe even more. We're always looking for new ideas. And if you have any for classes or have some thoughts about how the classes are structured, the presentations, don't hesitate to reach out, email me, talk to me about what you want to see in this kind of space. And if there's contacts or resource folks that we could reach out to develop other presentations in the future, we'd love that. Also, I'm assuming most of you are in our network and getting our mailing distribution for upcoming events. But if you're not, here's a couple ways you can find us. You can go online, to this web address, it goes directly to Land Stewards, or you can just search OSU Land Stewards Program and you'll find our page associated with OSU on our website. And there on that page, you'll find a toggle where you can subscribe. And that'll get you on our mailing list, keep you up to date on events that are coming up, opportunities to get connected with the program and that kind of thing. And we're not going to spam you. It's all high quality content that you want to see. Speaking of high quality content that's on its way and up and coming, here's a few events that are currently listed right now. These are upcoming programs through Land Stewards and also through some of the other OSU programs like Master Gardeners and whatnot. So we've got the big one coming up in June 3rd, ecologically based thinning and stand management. That's Marty, Maine. It's going to be a great course. We're offering that both as an in-person and a online, so kind of a hybrid. So take your pick there. Registration's open for those. I also saw there's an interesting class coming up in the other events here, the land leasing workshop. That's, if you're thinking about leasing your land to someone as a tenant farmer, that kind of give you some information about that. And that looked pretty interesting too. So anyway, sign up, check out these things. You can register and form online through our website. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me about it. Well, we're really lucky to start off for me, especially I feel honored to be able to start my first presentation here as the new coordinator working with Gordon Jones. I've had the opportunity, the pleasure to interact with him many times over the years. He's a very talented person who worked in our area for a long time and is continuing to give. So Gordon is a PhD. He serves currently in Central Oregon's agronomist for the OSU Extension Service based in Prineville. He holds a degree in environmental studies from Warren Wilson College and crop and soil sciences from Virginia Tech. Gordon conducts research. He teaches extension classes, provides technical assistance around pasture, forage, small grain management, soil fertility, drought resilience, and I bet you he has a lot more knowledge up his sleeve than just those things. And prior to his time in Central Oregon, he was here for 6 years at Extension. So many of you have had the opportunity to interact with him over the years. And I know Gordon worked on the pesticide stewardship partnership we had here going on in the Rogue and has been involved in, he gave a great presentation not long ago about how to convert your property. If you've got a property that was hemp or cannabis before, and now you're trying to figure out what to do with it next. And I thought that was really a neat presentation and certainly a topic people are hungry for to learn more about. So if you're here to learn about mowing, pastures, and management of other natural areas, you're in the right place and talking to the right guy. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Gordon here.
Thank you, Eugene. Pleasure to be back with the Land Stewards this evening. I've given a number of these presentations, both when I was down in the Rogue Valley and then since while I have been up in Central Oregon, and I see a number of familiar names on the participants list. And so good to see lots of folks again. Eugene, thank you for that nice introduction and hear whatever it was, 6 weeks, a couple of months ago, when I saw the email come across my desk that you had been hired as the land steward coordinator. I was delighted. I couldn't think of a better person to do this job. So I'm glad you're here, and look forward to good things to come. And thanks, Nicole and Wayne, and thanks to Marcy for um, getting me on the schedule. I think it was like back in maybe December that had initially talked about doing this class about mowing, and Marcy said the schedule's pretty open. Like, just pick a time when you think it would be seasonally appropriate. And so like, no, probably early May. And it now is that time here in Central Oregon as well. The grass is growing, and I trust that you're even further along there in the Rogue Valley. Um, I think this is like a broad and interesting topic, and it can go in lots of directions. We use like tools that are mowers in lots of our like natural and semi-natural landscapes. Um, I suspect I won't like touch on everything that you hope I will touch on, but the way that we'll resolve that issue is by having you ask questions. Would certainly welcome throughout the presentation you putting questions in the chat box. You'll probably find the chat box window with a little icon at the bottom of your screen, though in some cases it's at the top. Good luck finding that. Um, please put questions in there wherever. I will try to pay attention to that. If you have a like burning question and it seems like I'm gonna miss you or move on too quickly, use the raise your hand feature. I don't know where you find that. It's under a button that's called React. On my screen, I have a little heart that says React, and that'll bring up a pop-up, and one of those things says raise hand, and that will indicate to us that you have a question. In some cases, these things are nuanced enough that it makes more sense for you just to come off mute and ask your question out loud, and we can do a little back and forth. And so those are the logistical things I wanted to start with. I'm glad you're all here. Feel free to keep this casual and interrupt or raise your hand as you see fit. But to start with, I want to ask you all for a little bit of information. I think you can now see a mostly white screen that has like a QR code in the top left corner. I am curious about where you are all from. And so to use this tool called Slido, get your smartphone out, swipe it to the camera, hold the camera app up to that little QR code, and a little pop-up-y thing will come, and it'll bring you right to this Slido page. It looks like a couple people have figured that out. You can also, if you want to open another browser on your computer, you can go to slido.com, and it'll prompt you for a numeric code, and it's that 41245221. And so we've got folks from Phoenix and from Rogue River. I live in Redmond. Now you guys have gotten it, folks have gotten it figured out. I assume we've got lots of Southern Oregon, Rogue Valley people, but it looks like also folks from Dallas and Coburg and elsewhere. I'll give us a few moments to figure out this tool. We'll do a few of these questions. When I was down in the Rogue Valley from 2017 through early 2023, I lived in Talent and worked at the experiment station there in Central Point. And so I'm well familiar with that part of the world. So I'm Googling where Good River is, and I think we're probably was just a typo, and maybe that was Hood River. But if there's a place in the world called Good River, let me know where that is. All right, looks like lots of Rogue Valley folks. It looks like 19 of the 33 of us on here have figured out how to respond and use that tool. I'll give one more person who's typing there. Got a couple of Ashland people. Very good. All right, on to another question. I think when I press this button, it'll just carry you along with me. What sort of areas do you mow, or are you thinking about mowing? Thinking about like lawns or turf, like in front of or around your house? Some area that I'm going to call like a dry meadow or savanna, grasses that maybe don't have livestock on them. We've got dry pastures in the Rogue Valley that basically are the same thing as that meadow or savanna, but we've got them fenced and sometimes put livestock in them. Um, exactly what the line is between something in a weedy area is up to you to decide. Um, there's irrigated pastures that get mown. Hayfields are mown or often irrigated in that part of the world. And I've given you an other category um, as well. I'll give us another minute or two or three to answer this question because like the mowing management that we do in a lawn where we're really aiming for like sort of aesthetics is kind of different than what we might do in an irrigated hayfield where we're looking for production or tonnage or yield of high quality forage for livestock or animals are different than some of the dry sort of naturalized annual grasslands that we have through lots of the Rogue Valley. Right. Looks like that sort of like dry meadow weedy area um seems like the top vote here, and then lots of folks mow lawn. I spent 6 years 6 years in graduate school studying pastures and hayfields and forage crops and thinking about defoliation management and how grasses respond when you mow them in different ways. And some part of that was just like built on intuition from like riding lawnmower in circles around my parents' lawn in the summer for many years as a young person. And so mowing lawns is for many people is a familiar activity. One more question. Why do you mow or choose not to mow? Like, what are the things that you're thinking about? It says it's time to mow. What are those things um, that are sort of like on your mind about, I guess it's time to go mow, or maybe you want to choose not to for some set of reasons? Because I'm just curious what you're thinking about. Harvesting hay, fire safety, accessibility, getting rid of weeds, making things look nice, aesthetics, access to space, nesting habitat for birds, trying to get rid of weeds or undesirable plants, dealing with invasives, thinking about increasing biodiversity, encouraging the growth of natives, fire season, hot topic. Looks like a few more people are still typing. I'll give us a minute. Dealing with weeds. Some people mow late after the wildflowers bloom. Grazing management, maintaining succession. Got a pretty good list of topics here. Cool. Let's leave it there. I think we've got enough. This will stay open if you want to add more to this. You are welcome to. Let me find my presentation and we will begin. All right. Mowing pastures and managing other natural areas. Let's begin. So most of this talk is going to be about sort of our like natural to semi-natural kind of areas that range from weedy to desirable. Because as I think about it, I'm gonna have to get my remember my geography. This is a photo that I took. I bet I had driven up what I think is probably still called Dead Indian Memorial Road near Ashland, sort of to the east there. And I saw this nice looking vetch. I think I took this in May a few years ago and So it was like trespassing. I don't know whose land this was, but it was an attractive enough picture that worth hopping out of the truck and going and taking a look. And um, many of our hillsides in Southern Oregon as well, and this is true in California, historically would have been a set of perennial bunch grasses that lived sort of in the mosaic through these through the oak trees and what I would call a savanna type environment. Um, as sort of like European descended folks moved and explored through the West from California up into more northern areas, including the Rogue Valley. They brought with them livestock in many cases, those were sheep, and um, and grazed these areas really hard, had a high grazing pressure. And the perennial grasses that are native to uh, Southwest Oregon will tolerate grazing. That part of the evolutionary deal with our grasses is that they're uniquely suited to defoliation or being grazed. Um, but the grazing pressure was severe enough in the late 1800s and early 1900s that many of the perennial native grasses were lost, were just grazed into the ground and didn't survive. And what replaced them were a set of annual species that tend to be introduced ones in the sort of like herbaceous layer, not the trees, but the things that we see in this picture. And so much of what we see is purple vetch or bird vetch in the foreground here, but many of the grasses that we see are annual grasses that go through a complete life cycle in uh, from seed to seed in a sort of single season, and come from other parts of the world. And these annual plants are a lot of what we'll talk about this evening, make up the dry savanna, dry meadow that many of you are managing, and are also what are commonly in many of those weedy areas or a dry pasture as well. Um, mow are another sort of like herbaceous system that requires intensive management, and mowing is a big part of our lawns or turf or golf courses. And I'm not going to spend very much time talking about the management of those systems today. They're really, in some ways, they're like kind of similar because they are based in this sort of like herbaceous grass turf, and not actually that different, but just sort of the way that we deal with them and manage them is kind of different. And if you have questions, I will do my best to answer those. We're really not going to talk very much about your irrigated front lawn nor a golf course. If you're interested in learning more about that, OSU has some resources. Practical Lawn Care for Western Oregon is a resource that you can Google. It's freely available online. You can also visit extension.oregonstate.edu, and there you'll find a wide range of resources on a wide range of like natural area management, and help yourself to those. They are free and downloadable. So in terms of the uh, sort of a little bit more on the kinds of things that we commonly see in terms of species that folks might want to mow. These are all grasses in this example in the Rogue Valley. If you're in an irrigated hayfield or pasture environment and are thinking about grasses, probably these four are the most common that you'll see. These are all introduced species from Europe, Mediterranean, Caucasus, orchard grass, tall fescue, perennial ryegrass are really commonly planted. Hay and pasture grasses that do really well in irrigated parts of Southwest Oregon and really don't survive very well without irrigation. Likewise, meadow foxtail is a little bit of an older species, introduced, non-native. People just don't plant it that much. It's just sort of like around and creeps into old pastures and hayfields. I can talk more about these all evening, but we will not. The set of things that you probably see more commonly in that dry land pasture, that meadow, are annual grasses. All of those were perennial. You plant them once, and the same plant will continue to grow for many years in a row. These are annuals, and they do they have a adaptive sort of uh, ability to deal with the dry summers that you have in the Rogue Valley, that Mediterranean climate where things are warm and wet through the fall, winter, and spring, and then are hot and dry in the summer. I'd say plants like need water to grow, and if they don't have that water, need to find some other ways to fit in that ecosystem. And so we'll talk about the cycle of these annual plants, but basically don't grow during the summer. And they range from reasonably desirable ones like this soft chess, um, or sometimes called soft brome, to wild oats, and these can be good, both good forage species, and we see them up on those sort of west-facing slopes on the east side of the valley, to more like difficult and challenging ones, what you all down there call foxtail is probably more properly called hair barley, ripgut brome. Both of these are ones where like veterinarians probably like stay in business for removing these um, long, sharp awns from the eyes and ears and mouths of animals and livestock. Are really a challenging, sort of annoying, difficult set of weedy grasses. And Medusa head is another one that maybe not quite so injurious as foxtail or ripgut brome, but can really sort of like colonize and outcompete other species, and does well on that like black sticky clay that you have on the east side of the valley. Um, and so we like end up with, in some cases, dry grasses. I took this photo, I checked my this was in like sort of Central Point area, was in the end of September of 2022 is when I took this photo. Um, I would I know that a common question that I would get starting probably a couple of weeks ago, um, and running all the way through the season is, should I mow this? And that is one of the questions that we're going to try to tackle tonight and try to think about some of the considerations on, should I mow it? When should I mow it? What are the pros and cons of doing that? Um, but how did this end up like this? Just in terms of a growth cycle of a season. Um, let's look a little bit at that. Um, Here I've given you a sort of sketchy and rough calendar. I give you a sketchy and rough calendar rather than a precise one because this we'll talk about sort of the cycles of growth, but it can shift each year depending on temperature and moisture. And when those things happen, like how the grass and the weeds grow, really like differs year to year. So that's why I've not given you a very precise calendar. But when we think about a Mediterranean environment and the sort of like grassland, savanna kind of a system in the herbaceous component, um, we really think it does not match a cycle that is our calendar. It matches a cycle that is sort of out of kilter with our calendar, and that's because there's not a lot going on until rains in the fall. So September, October, early November, whenever those rains come and soak the soil, we've got seeds of these annual grasses that are present there, and it is moisture that is required to get those growing. And there is moisture, and there is more moisture, and there is more moisture. And things are relatively cool, and the days are pretty short. And so our grasses, uh, these ones that are tall now, when you're thinking about mowing, almost all of them sprouted or germinated at some point last fall. And they looked like nice little gentle green leafy grass. Um, and some of them this spring it's become clear are actually foxtail and the more annoying things, but you can't quite tell that because they're just growing leaves and they're in their sort of vegetative phase of growth rather than in their reproductive phase of growth. And so as we come out of winter and into March, probably, we both see temperatures warming up a little bit, and then also the days are getting longer based on our sort of like latitude, and those longer days, day length is a trigger for many of our grasses to switch from their just growing leaves to a cycle of completing their reproduction, putting up a seed head. And so that we start to see an acceleration of growth and a transition from vegetative to reproductive growth in the spring. And it's in the end of March or the middle of April in most years in that part of the world that we see this real hustle along and acceleration and accelerating growth, where plants will like sort of stretch skyward. A seed head will move from the ground level and will move up the plant. And at some point, and probably is happening right now or has over the past couple of weeks, we'll see the seed head emerge. And apologies for my sort of course cartoons. That's the best I can do. And so these things up here, and they look a little different on each grass plant, are the seed heads. And those are the flowers, and it's where the seeds will form. And as we get through May and into June, those seeds will go from being sort of soft and doughy to being hard to being ripe seeds, such that if they fell to the ground, they could germinate. And at some point, once those seeds are ripe and viable, that plant really has done its job. And so by the middle of May, or I trust there are some grasses out there, or there are some that have ripe seed on them. But as we go from there being a lot of green grass and pretty quickly, and you can adjust my dates if you think I'm wrong, but in May to June, things go from a lot of green grass to a lot of brown grass or a lot of golden grass. And that's that sort of completion of the life cycle of the annual grasses. They've sucked most of the moisture out of the soil, they've made seeds, and can just sort of stand there and let those seeds slowly fall to the ground as they're jostled by wind or get transported in other ways. And we see this transition in the spring, and these plants are done. Sort of this transition between green plants and golden brown ones goes from like living growth to no more growth. And we can look at this in a different way if we're to think about just like the number of like pounds of standing biomass per square foot or per acre. We see this sort of beginning of growth with the rains in the fall, slow growth during the winter. Come the middle of spring, we see this real hustle along. Peak biomass, peak growth occurs at just about this time of the year, if not, I don't know, last week or next week, just about this time of the year. And then slowly the plants sort of start to fall apart and decay, and in some cases stay standing all the way through the summer and are sometimes standing there if we don't do anything about them all the way into the next year, that they just are sort of carcasses of brown dead plants. And part of our decision making with mowing is, are we going to leave those there or are we going to do something to knock them to the ground? Um, and so this really is a cycle that has us have a question about somewhere in here, maybe we should mow these. And some question about what that mowing will do has to, will the grass just die if we mow it? Is it going to grow back if we mow it? We got to think a little bit more closely about what's going on in these grasses as this cycle is occurring. And so similar kind of cartoon, but a little different. Some folks who want to mow really just want to like mow once. And we say like, how do we think about how do I like mow once so that I can knock down most of this material and achieve my goals without this like regrowing too much. And so as we move through that sort of cycle in the spring, going from leafy vegetative growth to transitioning into reproductive growth, where the plants elongate, stretch towards the sky. There's this phase of growth called the boot stage. And for the life of me, I do not know why they call it the boot stage, but it's defined by the seed head of that grass being wrapped in the uppermost leaf. If we were to like peel this wide bit apart, we would find the like crumpled up seed head that's about to push up and spread out, and then heading occurs. And so an important like sort of piece of thinking about this is that there is a growing point or a meristem. It's just the like spot at which new growth of a grass originates. When grass is in this sort of like vegetative stage, That's like basically what your lawn does. It just like keeps growing leaves forever, and you can mow it pretty frequently, and it's just going to keep growing leaves. Um, that's a little bit more complicated than that in your lawn, but basically that's what occurs. And the growing point is really close to the ground. You can, I don't know, sometimes when you're like mowing the lawn and there's like a lump or a swale or a high spot, you like scalp the ground and you like clip off basically all of the grass. And in most cases, the grass keeps growing, and that's because it can grow back from that. It doesn't really like being scalped, but it can grow back from it. And that's because the growing point from which those new leaves originate is like at or even just below ground level. When we're in vegetative stage, we can't really kill grass with mowing, or you gotta work to do it. But as a shoot or tiller of grass transitions from in the spring from this vegetative stage through this set of this reproductive cycle, the growing point um, rises, moves upwards, and it moves upwards, and it moves upwards, and is located basically at the base of that seed head is the growing point, and so it has risen up. By the time the seed head has emerged. The grass, this individual shoot of grass is not going to grow any more leaves. There may be other shoots that are still growing leaves, but this one that has the seed head on it, not going to grow any more leaves. Not how grass works. And so then, if we're to think about mowing, uh, we can set some height on that mower, and if we were to have a tiller of grass at each of these 5 stages, and we were to mow them all at this height, um, uh, what will happen is that if you mow above the growing point, so in this example, the left-hand two, um, both in the vegetative and the transition phase, those grasses are going to keep growing. They're going to keep growing leaves, and they're going to keep trying to push up a seed head. But if we wait a little bit until those grasses are more mature, the growing point will rise above the level of that mower deck. And these 3 on the right-hand side, if we mow below that growing point, that shoot of grass is not going to grow any longer. And so thinking about the phase of growth that we're in when we do that mowing can be a determinant of do we expect that this grass is going to keep growing a lot, or do we expect that this grass is going to be done when we do that mowing? Um, the tricky wicket is that we rarely have individual shoots or tillers of grass that are all at an identical growth phase. We often will have or you always basically have groups of clusters of grass that are at slightly different growth phases. Maybe that's not true. If you had a cornfield, cornfields are pretty good about having identical individual shoots that are all at the same growth phase. And this would hold true where you can, when a corn plant is a foot tall, you can cut it or graze it. The growing point is at ground level. But when they get taller than that, the growing point rises, and mowing that hayfield would kill excuse me, cutting that cornfield, if you were able to chop it with a hefty mower, you'd kill all the corn plants. Corn, just another annual grass. So oftentimes in our difficult grasses, they don't grow as a single shoot, they grow as many shoots. And those shoots are both at different developmental stages and also have just a different arrangement. They're not all pointing straight up in the air. So this started from one seed, and that one seed put up a single initial shoot and then made these sort of side branches, or what we call daughter tillers or secondary tillers. And these will each have a growing point on them, but at the very least, depending on the angle at which those tillers are arranged, the growing points will be different heights away from the ground. And so when we pick our mowing height, and we even mow pretty close to the ground, these tillers in the middle, if we cut below their growing point, we may well kill those. But sometimes there are some tillers that are really laying close to the ground, what we would call prostrate to the ground. We can sometimes miss those with the same mowing height. And here's a picture of of a foxtail or a hair barley, that you can really see the like diversity of angles at which these tillers are growing. And then if we mow this all even pretty close, like close enough to the ground to hit this soil clod, I bet we actually miss at least this seed head and maybe a couple that are over here. And those will probably continue to grow. If these seeds aren't already viable, these ones that we miss with the mower will become viable seeds and will keep growing. Um, that's just the trick with grasses about how do we choose when do we mow these. Um, so we come back to this. We then ask the question. Now we know a little bit more about how grass grows and goes through its developmental processes. If we're just going to mow it once, when might we mow it? If I'm in the Rogue Valley in this annual grass system where I'm thinking about um, trying to keep my property safe and meet a diversity of goals, I'm probably somewhere in this range from uh, sometime in March or April through sometime in the summer. And we know we've got sort of trade-offs in that. But if I'm going to just mow once, I'm in that window somewhere, but how do we decide where in that window we land from mowing green grass um, to mowing crunchy golden brown grass? Pros and cons on doing that. Let's look at this little table that I've set up. Um, Thinking in that span of the grasses are, and we're probably squarely in the middle of it. Lots of our grass in the Rogue Valley, I suspect, looks about like this. In the places where the soil is poorer or things are drier, you're probably in the sort of like crunchier, browner phase. And there probably are some grasses that still have yet to put up their seed head, but you're somewhere in this continuum. Um, um, Hang on. Is there any questions on any of this stuff before I get into some of these? Should we mow earlier? Should we mow later? Let me look in the chat. Would it be very different in the Willamette Valley compared to the Rogue Valley? Um, um, Not that different. In the Willamette Valley, um, na it is only in the drier places that we have annual grasses. The Rogue Valley is a such a hot and dry summer that we just are not able to keep perennial grasses persisting very well. And so it's only with irrigation that we have perennial grasses. But in the wetter parts of Western Oregon, and particularly as you get up into Washington, there's enough moisture through the summer and the temperatures are cool enough that we'll maintain perennial grasses. Perennial grasses really have the same cycle if we think about them sort of from this like uh, whatever that is, January, February, kind of a time period up through. Most grasses will only, even perennial grasses, will only put up a seed head once a year. Um, there is some regrowth that can occur in later in the summer, and things don't necessarily like dry out to such a great degree. Um, but yeah, sort of. Things are basically similar. And I bet I haven't um, answered your question entirely, but let's come back to it as we chug through a little bit more of this. So we're going to cut on the earlier side when things are still green. We're going to let things like totally get brown and dried out, so you're like really feeling like anxious about wildfire season, and then bring out the big mower that's hot and dusty and it's going to hit rocks and make sparks. They're reasonable. I'm joking, but there are reasonable pros and cons to doing both of those things. So if we mow earlier in the year versus later, uh, there's a better chance if we mow early that some of those growing points are going to be below our mower deck. And so that grass can still grow. Um, and so there's more likelihood that the grass keeps growing if we mow really early in the season. Um, if we if we mow later, more of those grasses are going to have completed their life cycle, are going to have set seeds, um, and uh, aren't going to regrow. The soil's dry. They've like sort of done what they can. Um, likelihood that there are viable seeds. In some cases, we choose to do mowing either because we want our plants to set seed because they're desirable ones. We'd like those seeds to fall to the ground and potentially germinate when new rains come. And in other cases, um, they're weedy plants, and we don't really want them to go to seed. And so, if we mow earlier, we will have the chance of nipping off those plants before they totally flower and set seed. Um, and mowing a little earlier will reduce the amount of seed that's out there, whereas mowing later will increase the seeds. And if that's a good thing or bad thing, that's like totally opposites kind of a thing. If I'm trying to kill foxtail with my mower, I'm probably going to mow earlier. But if I want to improve my wildflower population, I probably have to mow later. And if my property and my meadow is a mixture of foxtail and a mixture of wildflowers, now I'm in a real pickle because the one needs earlier mowing and the other needs later. Um, the in some cases, uh, we think about those sort of clippings, the things that like fall to the ground. Um, we might want them to decompose. If we mow earlier, where there's still some moisture, those clippings are going to be less fibrous. They're going to have a better carbon to nitrogen ratio, will decompose faster. And if we wait till they're totally crunchy and golden brown, they're going to sort of lay on the soil surface. It'll be too dry. The material will be too fibrous, and we'll have to wait till fall or winter for the decomposition process to start. Good or a bad thing, I don't know. Depends on your goals. Um, Benefits to pollinators. If we mow early, that may be before all the wildflowers have flowered. Our grasses are wind pollinated. Having grasses in flower doesn't really help insects. We need to have broadleaf plants, wildflowers, different kinds of things in order to benefit pollinators. Mowing later will mean that there's chance for more of those flowers to bloom. Was tromping around in the hills outside of Jacksonville, Talent, Ashland at some point. And here at the top of the hill, we find a wild oat plant. That's the grass that's in the middle and in the background. It's green, but it's basically set seed. It is, I think I took this photo probably in May. Um, it's kind of a good time physiologically for these oats for them to be mown. But if I want these lupins to confer the sort of ecosystem benefits that lupins confer by contributing nectar and pollen to various pollinators, kind of need to let these oats just hang out and allow the lupins to keep growing. And so that's one of these where we end up with a bit of a trade-off. Uh, yeah, a trade-off one way or the other. Um, and so when we mow early, we have less pollinator benefit. When we mow later, more pollinator benefit. If that's a priority to you, that really is up to you. It is not, you're allowed to have whatever goals you want to. And as we saw that big word cloud at the beginning, some folks were interested in pollinator habitat and others not. It's up to you. Wildlife. Generally, the longer that we keep some tall grass out in the world, that tends to be better wildlife habitat than if we mow that grass really early. And again, you don't have to care about wildlife. In some cases, wildlife is a nuisance. But I was asking my partner, who's a birder, about ground nesting birds, and he tells me about savanna sparrows and western meadow larks are species that nest on the ground in tall grass. And if we mow that grass right when it gets tall, there's a chance that we're gonna disturb those nests before those chicks are able to fledge and leave the nest. Whereas if we delay that mowing until the grass is more mature, later into June, there's a chance that those nesting birds will be gone and will be less disturbed by our mowing activity where mowing earlier is somewhat harder on those bird ground nesting bird populations. So again, that's up to you. We'll see that all these things don't go in the same direction. Wildfire risk, we know that the wildfire risk is worse in the summer than it is in the spring. And so waiting longer both means that you have a sort of like taller amount of material that is a fuel for the wildfire, but you also have a drier environment in which you're actually doing the act of mowing. And we know, and somebody mentioned in the comments, there are like rules about, and we'll talk about them, about when you can and can't mow, because as the air gets drier and the vegetation gets drier, um, in basically in most cases when we're mowing, there's like fast spinning metal around. Perhaps not with like your electric weed whacker that has plastic string on it. Maybe is certainly less of a fire risk, but there's spinning metal and in some cases like hot spinning metal involved in this process. And so if we do that in a drier environment, we just are going to have a greater risk of sparks and then have a fuel source that is drier. Um, and so as we come back and look at this photo, I'd say, yeah, letting this like get all the way till September, there is like some fuel load out here. This has had some grazing on it. We can see it's lower in some places, and that maybe is a manure pat. But there's some fire risk out here, and this is an agricultural setting, which when we're sometimes the rules are a little different for agricultural settings. But as somebody in the chat box, Jennifer said, it's prohibited to mow when it's dry. And so, what exactly is the prohibition? Not totally true that it's prohibited to mow when it's dry, but it depends on where we are in terms of like fire risk in the season, where Forest Service in Oregon will set our fire risk at low, medium, high, and extreme, and then there are rules that come with that. Rules about all sorts of things that hopefully you're familiar with that range from dealing with electric fences to operating recreational and motor vehicles to running saws and generators. But down here, we've got a whole set on cutting, trimming, and mowing of dried, cured grass. Let's read about this. When we are in this green level, low risk, and this is determined by the Oregon Department of Forestry, I believe, mowing of dried cured grass is fine at all times of day. That they've determined that risk is low enough. There generally is still some moisture. This is early in the season. It's generally before like fire season begins. Then as we move up into the moderate and high risk categories, the blue and the yellow, we get some time restrictions on when mowing may occur. It's not that mowing is prohibited. Mowing is allowed, but it's allowed early in the day or at night, times when humidity is going to be higher and reduce the likelihood that a spark will actually catch the vegetation on fire. As we move into a higher risk, they're saying conditions are only safe to mow at before 10 a.m. or after 8 p.m. And it's only when we get to extreme fire risk that mowing is actually prohibited. And so if we're headed towards mowing kind of late, when things are brown and getting crunchy and it's kind of dry, we really do need to assess where we are in terms of fire risk level, because both there is I guess I would say for like personal and neighborly reasons, there's good reason not to want to catch dry grass on fire. But then there also are some like regulatory restrictions on doing that. Don't totally actually know what the consequences are for violating these things, other than it just generally being a bad idea. A couple other things to note here. It's like if you're using a battery or an electric string trimmer, and I think this is a string trimmer that has plastic string on it and rather than a metal blade, that is exempt, as well as if you are cultivating or harvesting agricultural crops, somebody who is harvesting a crop of like wheat or barley, there's a little bit of those grain crops that are grown in the Rogue Valley. Those are crunchy brown annual grasses by the time that they're harvested with generally with a combine to separate the grain from the straw. There is a fire risk there, but it is exempt because it is agricultural. And then mowing of green irrigated grass is exempt from these restrictions. You can mow your irrigated lawn when you want to. You need to follow these restrictions if you're mowing dried, crunchy grass. So there's like a timing thing about will these grasses regrow or not. I think I'm suggesting that if I'm going to mow my grass one time in the Rogue Valley, it's probably just about this time of the year. I want to catch the grasses when they've got most of their seed heads out, so there's a reduced chance that they're going to regrow after that mowing. But I want to do it before they get totally crunchy and dry and brown, because I don't want to be the one who lights the valley on fire. And want to do it when I want to and not be constrained by those rules. But there's something about this sort of like cycle of mowing can either stop grasses from growing or plants from growing, or earlier in the season in a different growth phase, the same harvest management, the grasses will continue to grow. And so in a slightly sort of similar but kind of different way, let's talk about everyone's favorite star thistle, the yellow star thistle. Is another one of these things that we say, like, are we going to mow this or are we not going to mow it? How do we get rid of it? There's a good chance that land stewards have a recording of me talking about controlling troublesome weeds, including yellow star thistle, that will delve into a broader, more integrated set of discussion about dealing with star thistle. But let's just talk a tiny bit about mowing on star thistle here. I think folks are pretty familiar with this phenomenon, and sorry for a pixelated image here, but the like pincushion, where when you mow star thistle, it just puts up more seed heads, but closer to the ground and closer to the ground, such that you can't actually get your mower deck close enough to kill them. Annoying. And so some folks out of California did some research on the height of mowing and where they're mowing in the middle of June, and so early in the season. And they found that when they would mow at 8 inches, didn't mow or mow at 8 inches or 6 inches or 4 inches or 2 inches, the star thistle still produces hundreds and hundreds of seed heads and seeds, and it's only when you mow it all the way to the ground that you're able to kill those star thistle plants. And so mowing high and mowing early before the seed heads are out doesn't do you any good. The plant will just turn into pincushion form and produce those seed heads closer to the ground. And so if we want to use mowing as a control strategy, mowing sort of like with the grasses, if they're in their sort of like reproductive phase, so they go from being leafy to having their sort of stars on them, their spines, to those spines, which are really flower buds opening up and then showing you their yellow flower. And it's only pretty late into the flowering process that the seeds on those star thistles are viable. And so mowing star thistle is never going to kill all of the star thistles, but it might help and be part of a broader integrated strategy on controlling them. But if it's going to be a part of a useful strategy to reduce at least a little bit the number of star thistle you have, mowing too soon means that it's going to just set those flowers closer to the ground. Mowing too late means that there are viable seeds on those star thistles, and you've now blown and broadcast them around the property, and you'll just have even more star thistles the next year. Recommendation is to wait till 5% of the flowers have, or 5% of the stars have yellow flowers on them, and then set your mower as absolutely close to the ground as you can and mow them once then. And that's your best chance of killing star thistles with mowing. Usually people call me when their field is entirely in bloom, and that means most of those plants will have um, mature seeds on them. And you can certainly mow them then, it will knock them down, but you'll have plenty of star thistles next year. You wait till pretty early, just 5% of those flowers have 5% of those buds have yellow flowers on them. Mow then. I think I'm going to skip this for the time being, and I'll show you a few photos. So you say, well, um, what if I have some nice plants? Do I have to mow them? And I say, well, no, you can do whatever you want. Here's a perennial grass, it's orchard grass, and perhaps if you wanted to, you'd say, I'm going to take care of that orchard grass. The rest of this stuff is weeds. I can see some wild oats in there, and I think there's some Medusa head up here. Um, when you mow something, you can when you mow a field or a weedy area, you are certain you do not need to go from edge to edge. There certainly is like a yeah, you don't need to go from edge to edge. You can avoid plants that you want to avoid. Um, if you've got a sweet patch of wildflowers and you say, I'm worried about wildfire risk, and I know that mowing earlier will help me with my wildfire risk, but I also have some sweet flowers out there that are beautiful, that are habitat for pollinators or other insects. Maybe you would go and earlier in the year, you'd mow the weedier, grassier parts, and you just leave an island of the more desirable stuff. And then later, when this has completed its life cycle, you'd be very careful. You'd check your fire risk status. You'd probably still mow in the morning. You'd think about, uh, are there rocks in there that I'm going to hit and are likely to spark? You're going to bring your hose and your fire extinguisher, but again, making sure that you're following those that fire risk level and restrictions. Um, Maybe you'd mow some parts of the property earlier because there really are just weeds and there's nothing good to be had. And maybe there are some places that have your native plants or your wildflowers or something that just looks cool and you want to keep it around. Certainly allowed to do that differential management. Different areas might need different things. Um, if you're like working on your meadow, somebody was saying that part of the reason to mow is keep the um, keep those things, what do you call it, those seed heads out of your socks. Or those like sticky Velcro plants that are spreading hedge parsley. Just like straight up annoying when you have to like pluck them out of your socks to put them in the washer and dryer. Um, if you so choose, mow yourself a path. That's an option. You don't have to, if being able to get through an area without moving a bunch of seeds around, mow yourself a path. Um, and then maybe decide if you're going to come back later. If you're thinking about wildfire risk, when is that later? Do you actually have a viable window? But in some places, you might. Um, it might make sense to mow yourself a path and then come back a few weeks or a month later and carefully mow after the flowering part of your meadow has sort of completed its process, or maybe you're late enough that you think wildlife are no longer using those areas. Um, you can also, this is some sort of agricultural setting. If we're thinking about wildlife, some cases we might have our field that gets managed more intensively, mown more frequently, and we might choose to leave a strip of tall grass, and then have this sort of like a gradient. And these kind of what is called a soft edge, where you go from intensively managed to an area that's mown once a year, to some shrubby areas, to some trees, can be desirable for wildlife habitat. Maybe there's some place that gets mown a couple of times during the season, just once during the season, and then is never mown, and you can um, uh, soften an edge uh, and do that. Um, If you're thinking about wildfire risk, you might mow your entire property. You might also think about mowing a fire break. I suspect that if this fellow were thinking about an encroaching wildfire, um, having a mown strip and a mown strip that was mown long enough that there's not like a bunch of thatch sitting on the soil surface makes it an easier job about thinking about um, breaking a fire, stopping the forward motion of a fire by having a mown strip. You might mow sooner and more often near your house or valuable resources or along fence lines where um, fire is only catastrophic if it's burning catastrophic things. The ecosystems of Southwest Oregon's are ones that are well adapted to fire, but it is when they get out of control and are at the wrong time of the year and at the wrong place that are more highly problematic, other than it being annoying and hard on your health for the air to be smoky in the end of the summer. Um, Let me see. Before I transition on, let me do a couple of questions here. Um, Star thistle typically blooms after the 4th of July, and that's typically when we get extreme fire damage, fire danger, and you can't mow. If those two things are the case, then you can't mow. But I would suspect that not in every year. Some years, star thistle certainly is more of a summer plant than it is a spring plant. Um, but the my concern is not with the calendar date, but it is with the growth stage of that plant, and it is with the actual fire status that has been declared in that moment. Probably is relatively rare that uh, in non-agricultural areas you can mow effectively for star thistle, but it is not impossible. There will be moments and circumstances where that is doable. Um, um, I'll catch some more of these questions. Um, yep, I am not suggesting that mowing is the best control of star thistle. If you want to control star thistle by mowing it, we there's a certain time in that life of that plant when mowing would be effective. If that's a certain time when you're actually able to mow it, depends on the year, depends on where you are. All right, let's talk about different kinds of mowers a little bit. There are two main kinds of mowers that you might use in these natural areas. What's called like a rotary mower or a brush hog. This is one it's flipped up so we can see underneath it. There is a rotating central drum that rotates uh, parallel to the ground or perpendicular to the grass growth that then has blades that spin along the ground. This is basically what most lawn mowers are. Um, and is a rotary mower, tend to be pretty common, are relatively inexpensive to operate. Um, and then another kind of mower is called a flail mower. And a flail mower has a drum that rotates parallel to the ground, rotates like this, and then has these flails that are either directly connected to this drum or in some cases are connected with a short chain onto the drum. And a flail mower has the ability to um, because it's spinning like this, will chop the grass or the material multiple times and can result in a finer mulch. Likewise, these are like a little hardier where you can set it closer to the ground where it might during a fire safe time of the year uh, interact with a rock and do less damage to the mower than if you try to you take a big chunk out of one of these blades on a rotary mower. And so but are a reasonably significantly more expensive tool with a flail mower. Likewise, tend to like need to move more slowly. Um, If you've got like branches or woody stuff to chop up, a flail mower tends to be a better tool. In the orchards and the vineyards of the Rogue Valley, pretty common for pruning to occur in um, early in the year, and then for for those farmers to go through and use a flail mower to just chop up the prunings in the alleyways of orchards and vineyards. Um, Another sort of challenge of a rotary mower is that you've got these spinning blades, and sometimes you just have a single spinning blade, and sometimes like this one you've got a wide mower that has three separate spinning blades, but those are all spinning in some direction. um, and that means you can sort of see it here where you've got relatively clean grass on the left hand side of this, and then you've got a strip where all the mulch has been laid. And um, that is okay. If you're mowing really tall grass, though, in some cases can like mound up enough be to be problematic, either as a fuel source or to smother the things uh, that are growing underneath. Um, is worth a consideration, where a flail mower will drop that mulched material a little bit more evenly along the width of the mower. As we were prepping for this, there was a question about what should we do with the clippings. These are like lush green lawn clippings. Um, if they're lush green lawn clippings, I would not be bagging them up. I would be mulching them in place and dropping them to the ground. If you're dealing with a small area and you want to pick up um, your dead clipped foxtail, you certainly can do that. That's a way to remove some of the seeds, to remove the fire risk. But with that, you're also removing some of like the soil nutrients that are present there that in lawn clippings like this, there are probably in each pound of dry clippings, there are a few percent of nitrogen and maybe a 0.5% of phosphorus and 2 or 3 or 4% potassium. And if those nutrients are going to the landfill, they're both um, uh, are both uh, a waste in the landfill and are sort of like robbing your soil of what are plant nutrients that would help the desirable plants to grow. Um, And so removing those clippings is really up to you. Like all of this, fortunately, they're not totally like one right answer. It depends on the environment that you're in and what your goals are. Um, but yes, now's the time of year that if you want to mow, probably good to start thinking about mowing. Um, with that, I will take some questions. Um, I've got yeah, we can talk about more things, but it looks like there's some questions in the chat box here, and let's start working through those. There's a question about if a discus is allowed during extreme fire danger. Uh, Clarissa or Francis, I think, are gonna need to explain a little bit more about what you mean by that. Um, we can go back and look at this set of things that are prohibited and allowed during different.
Okay, so a discus, the round discs you pull behind a tractor for plowing a field.
Oh, okay. I would call that a disc. Um, um, but understood. I don't. If it is for agricultural use, where you're actually going to like try to grow a crop to harvest,
No, I'm trying to kill. I'm trying to kill during fire season.
you're trying to kill during fire season.
I'm trying to find a loophole.
Well, I guess I
how do
don't.
I kill my star thistle, my tarweed, my foxtail? And so I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can I deal with some of this stuff? I haven't mowed yet because I was waiting for this class, and so I'm
Yeah.
looking at my foxtails, and
Yep.
they've already gone to seed.
They're gone. Yep, they're done.
So I missed this year. So now I've got 3 dogs that I have to worry about taking to the vet because of the foxtail. And so I'm sitting there. It's like, okay, I've got star thistle that there again, my dog's paws. I've got the tarweed.
So I guess I would suggest that you go ahead and mow, that having those things be on the ground rather than like up getting tangled in things,
Right.
not a solution, but a reduction of risk.
Right.
Um, Mowing alone is never gonna
Correct. I know
solve,
that.
is never gonna
I know.
solve any of these things. And I guess I would say
Listen.
this isn't gonna solve these things, but are, what do you call it? Once you have problems, are ways that you say, like, how do I get through the summer and reduce my problems?
Are you familiar with a box blade?
Yep.
Okay, so I used a box blade from our front door to our gate because that's a path that the dogs ran.
Yep.
So there was nothing there. It was bare dirt.
Uh-huh.
That way they had nothing to step
Had
on and get hurt.
nothing to, yep.
Okay, and so that's why I'm thinking about the disc. It's like, okay, I'm trying to come up with, okay, how do I take this 4 acres and make it not a fire hazard, make it not dangerous for the dogs, and
Yeah.
look halfway decent?
And so, right. And so there's a broader conversation where that I'm not totally prepared to get you all the way through this evening. We got to get desirable plants to grow there because something is going to grow every wet season. Is
Yes.
something is going to grow, and how do I push it towards the like less annoying set of plants that I can just mow once, rather than the forever battle where I'm slightly behind and sort of get tangled up in the way that you are on being just a little bit behind. And so a couple or one potential thing to think about is grass called annual ryegrass.
Okay.
You do your disking in the end of the summer, and then come first rains in the fall, and you can buy it from the Grange Co-op or Coastal in big 50-pound bags,
Okay.
and spread a bunch of annual ryegrass seed in those places. It's gonna act with this same cycle that the rest of the annual grasses do, where it'll come up with fall rains and just sort of like hang out and be green and seem like nice grass through the winter. And then come spring of next year, it's going to grow through this same cycle. And um, it will, at this time of the year, put up its seed head, and shortly thereafter, it will dry out and get crunchy and brown and be a fire hazard. But it doesn't get stuck in paws of animals. It does not get hooked in your pants and tracked all over the house. And it can be mown once at about this time of year, and it grows vigorously enough that there's a chance it'll do some smothering. Probably
Okay.
need to
So
get
choke
replanted
out
each fall.
choke it out. Okay.
And so my encouragement is, and the land stewards can have me back, or we can get you connected with Nan, who's the who took my position in the Rogue Valley, to think about it more strategically. It's like, if we want to get around this whole thing, we've got to find some plants to grow that are suited to the environment and are less problematic, because something's going to grow. And things will even
Mhm.
grow in the summer, and you won't get stuck in this battle of um, I don't want to set something on fire, or I'm not allowed to use certain tools. But that would be that's my start on that. Let me move on to another question and
Thank you.
circle back if there's more. Um, um, I have several small meadow, oak, savanna, maple. Is there any ecological benefit to mowing once or twice a year? Um, no, there tends to be ecologically, there tends to be some benefit of having some matrix of like sort of taller and shorter stuff, where if we allow some areas to stay standing, um, that will provide habitat for critters, will allow new oak seedlings to start growing in those places. But are places with more standing material in some at some point in the year become dry and crunchy, are a fire risk. Um, I don't know that there's really a benefit to mowing twice, unless you want to catch this first flush of grasses and knock those down. And then in some cases later in the year, you have other weeds. And if you want to, before you go into winter, mow again, it certainly can be done. Is there ecological benefit to mowing more than once? Probably not. My flail mower tends to leave taller strips of unmown grass, leaving it uneven. Am I mowing too fast? It can often just be either the like mower tractor arrangement. I don't know if we'll get there in this picture. So the trick with the flail mower is we've got different widths of wheels and we've got different widths of flail mowers. Here we like have to knock down some grass with the wheels of the tractor before the flail mower gets to it. And mowing a little more slowly will increase the chances that that grass stands back up and you can catch it with the mower. But there are some cases where you just like end up with either too wide, yeah. I guess I would say mow more slowly and really think about where your overlap is on the one pass to the next pass. In some cases, you just tend to miss because you've driven over it rather than mowing it. And that can happen with any of these kinds of mowers. And thinking about your mowing height in that as well setting up a slightly lower mower will help to catch some of the stuff that has even been squeezed down by the wheels. Couple of comments here about star thistle. Yes, we could do a full thing on star thistle. I'm sort of sorry I brought that up to only tell you a 2-minute story about star thistle and not giving you a bigger picture of it. Mowing alone isn't going to solve your star thistle problem. It is a tough timing. That's another one where we got to think about desirable vegetation. Star thistle like really doesn't like it in any shade. And so you'll find that if you walk underneath the oak tree, the star thistle's not there. And you walk out of the shade of the oak tree, the star thistle is there. We can do things with with plants that we can plant, like the annual ryegrass that we talked about, or some other cover crop that would get a little taller than the star thistle and shade it out and reduce the number of seeds that plant would have. If you're on a years-long wild goose chase about yellow star thistle, after this meeting, get on Dr. Google and type in yellow star thistle management guide. And there's like 140 pages of bedtime reading on star thistle management that talks about mowing and about herbicide and about cover crops and about pulling it and about animals. And bon appetit. It's a good one. Yellow star thistle management guide. If your goal is to get the grass spread out and cover the bare earth, it sounds like it would be best to mow early before the growth tips rise too high. Eugene, say more about that.
Yeah, I was just thinking, a lot of times we're focused on knocking grass down, trying to get rid of it, trying to control it. But in my situation, I had a bare area I was trying to get revegetated, just getting something to grow there. So I, seeded in some desirable grasses, kind of like you had suggested with the disking approach, and trying to figure out how to encourage them to grow more. And based on your schematic of the growth stages. And it seems like mowing early might actually encourage the grass to spread out more or send out sort of more side shoots. And I just wonder if you had any other thoughts on that. And I think that also gets at a question that Willard had further down here about how to encourage more forage for animals in pastures. And could we use mowing as a tool to do that?
Yeah, sort of. Let me see. Let me see if I can find. I have like 11 presentations over here. Let me see if I can find one more that I want to show you. Where would that be? The answer is like sort of, not totally. It's complicated. Just bear with me a moment here. I give about 1,000 presentations about grasses, and they all include slightly different things depending on the circumstance. So mowing can make our grasses like leafier. Most of the grasses that we deal with do not actually like spread very far. Um, Here, I did this experiment at the research station there in Central Point. I took some orchard grass, and so this is pasture grass, and I this is my randomized experiment, and I'm looking sort of down at it from the step ladder. Um, the ones I let grow all year, and I cut once in the fall. This was irrigated. Uh, the twos I cut once in the spring and once in the middle of the summer. The threes I cut 3 times, and the fives I cut 5 times. All with the same mower at the same height. Um, Here's my one, and there's my five. I have like a much leafier thing going on when I sort of mow it like a lawn. It forces the plants to stay in their leafier phase and grows more like a lawn, where I've got a fair amount of like dead area when I like really like let this when I push the grass to grow because it was being watered. This doesn't happen in dryland environments, but yes, we can spur on like leafiness of grass growth by mowing more frequently, but most of the grasses that we deal with um, grow in like little clusters, and their clusters become leafier, but they don't actually like run over. Don't Most of our grasses, if they have rhizomes, are very short. Um, let's see. I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment. What else do we have for questions? And so then on Willard's question, we speak about mowing to encourage pasture growth and provide, what the goal is to provide forage for grazing animals. Willard, I am going to assume that you have an irrigated pasture. That may not be true, but for this discussion, if we want the mowing to help, it is going to be in an irrigated pasture. So we're remembering that grass growth cycle that goes from leafy in March and April to growing really quickly and putting up the seed heads at this time of the year. Those seed heads are pretty, have a lot of fiber in them. Animals will start to sort of avoid like the tall, seedy grass, and they will definitely avoid like brown, crunchy grass. In an irrigated system where we have perennial grasses like orchard grass and tall fescue and the rye grasses, you can cut at about that same timing. Once the seed heads are up, basically at the time when you would cut for hay, if you cut and remove those seed heads and either knock down that material or remove it as a crop of hay, what will grow back in an irrigated system is leafy vegetative grass again. And so that leafy vegetative grass is higher quality than the stemmy stuff that was there before. So I think in an irrigated pasture, they don't require mowing. That with the right kind of grazing management, grazing animals can remove those seed heads as well, but like requires some like pasture management 301 kind of strategery to get to work. And so if you get through and you arrive with your irrigated pasture in June and you still have some tall stuff that's kind of getting brown, animals won't really utilize that. And mowing once to knock that stuff down will help to reset that pasture and spur on new growth. Sheep and goats love star thistle and blackberries and will eat it when it's green. And
Yeah.
how do we
I was gonna
place?
say, you had a question from Tom in there.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
doing a bad job of paying attention.
he's
Farmer. When is it best to fertilize? When it's wet and soft earlier in the year, after first cutting, after second cutting, in the fall when it's dry. Yep. To maximize hay production, you would fertilize in the like mythical dry period that's supposed to occur in like February or early March. Depends on your soil, on the reality that that's true. In some years, I feel like the old timers were always like, there's always a dry period in February for 10 days that you can do some good farm work. I don't know. But yes, to that first growth through the spring when those grasses transition from leafy to into their reproductive phase has a great potential to produce a lot of tonnage in terms of hay. And getting at least nitrogen fertilizer applied before then in March or at the very latest in early April will help to increase the yield and the protein content of that hay. And then if you're in a two cutting system and are aiming to maximize hay production, applying fertilizer again after you get first cutting raked and baled and those bales off the field, then pretty quickly applying another round of nitrogen fertilizer. In high production grass hay systems, you generally apply nitrogen fertilizer before each cutting. Generally two in the Rogue Valley. I guess there are probably there are a few folks taking 3 cuttings of grass hay in the Rogue Valley, but it is before those first cuttings. If you apply your nitrogen fertilizer in the fall, nitrogen is a nutrient that's kind of volatile and mobile. And most of it will be lost before the grasses are able to grow enough to draw it into the plants. We would not recommend applying significant amounts of nitrogen fertilizer in the fall, but rather during the growing season prior to your first and second cutting. We could teach a whole class on fertilizing of hay fields and not, so that's a pretty cursory review of that. Anna has a question about how do you replace the grasses you don't want with grasses you do want, mowing regularly and then reseeding. That is a topic that we really, I see somebody affirms that with an emoji. I think we need a plan for another class on that. There is a big, I've taught one before and am well equipped to do it, but it ranges on a kind of a continuum of mowing regularly and then reseeding. In some cases, that'll kind of work, but chances are there are more seeds in weedy seeds in the ground that are going to come up at the same time that the desirable ones are. And in some cases, our weedy plant species are better equipped to like grow. That's why they're weeds, that they like outcompete the good stuff. And so the disking strategy we talked about earlier to bury some of those seeds, it can help, but it's not going to result in a perfect field of desirable grass when you come back and plant. You often need to spend some amount of time either during the wet winter or if you're talking about your small lawn, using your sprinkler on a quarter of an acre or less to water up and sprout some of those weed seeds, maybe even a couple of times, and then kill them with probably tillage or herbicide or using what do we call it? Big like tarps or sheets of cardboard to like smother on a small scale is a way to do that, and really try to reduce the weedy seed bank before you come back in with desirable grasses. It's a better bet, but we could spend more than 2 minutes talking about that subject and how you pick the good grasses and all of that stuff. I'm happy to come back and do that. Eugene, do you think we missed any important questions?
No, I think you pretty much covered it here. And I don't see anything else unless it pops up here soon. Hey, I have one question to you for you. I noticed in restoration projects over the years that the late season weeds like puncture vine and star thistle seem to be suppressed to a certain degree when we didn't fall into the temptation to mow early. Like when we let because we're not walking through these areas all the time, we let them grow tall, and it did seem to suppress particularly puncture vine, which would just emerge immediately after a mowing. So I don't know, any thoughts on that as a strategy?
Yep. Something's gonna grow. And if we get so focused on getting rid of the grass everywhere, there sometimes still is some soil moisture. And we've now put like light right directly on the ground, where some of these grasses, be they like slightly annoying to injurious to pets, provide some shade. And star thistle in particular does not like shade. Puncture vine is a plant that grows in our like most disturbed sites. It grows in like the edge of the driveway and the pathway that you've been tamping down and compacting. And we don't actually see puncture vine like in a pasture, in a hayfield, in the woods, in they're mud, they only like next to the trail, the place where you're driving in your restoration site, and the edge of the gravel pad is where we're going to get puncture vine. And so, I don't know if I said it very clearly at the beginning. I think that this topic of mowing is difficult because it's one tool in the toolbox, and like mowing isn't the answer for everything. Some of these things we've been talking about need seed and a disc and other activities, and in some cases we need to leave the plants there. And mowing is one tool that has a place in a big toolbox of tools. And it really depends on what your goals are. It's easy to say like, well, it's the springtime, everything has grown, there's a fire risk, we have to mow. Yes, if you're like within the city limits of Ashland or something, they're going to make you mow, but you don't actually have to in every case. We saw that there are like pros and cons going in different directions in that big table of pros and cons. And you don't have to mow, and you can mow strategically. So you reduce wildfire risk and risk to your pets, but aren't necessarily like causing more weedy problems or burning a bunch of diesel fuel. There's some trade-offs. It's not, people love to like send me an email saying like, Gordon, should I mow? It's like, yikes, we're going to have a long phone conversation to understand a lot more context about your goals and what you're worried about and what you're interested in to understand if you should mow or you shouldn't. I hope that's helpful.
It was really
Eugene,
helpful. Thank you. Another great presentation, Gordon.
Yeah, I didn't put my email address anywhere, but I work for OSU. If you Google Gordon Jones and OSU, you'll find my email address. Somebody has my phone number somewhere. You can find it. I welcome a phone call. My like day job is as an extension agent, and so I spend a fair amount of time answering questions from all sorts of folks. I may like refer you to somebody else who's more proximate down there in Southwest Oregon than I am, but happy to get you guided in the right direction. Thank you all for being here. Lots of good questions and interest in the topic, and have a good evening.
Thank you. And we'll get this presentation posted, and that way folks can share it with others. And yeah, thanks again, Gordon. Great to have you. Excellent slides, excellent press. Thank you.
Sweet.